My name is Alina Hart. I'm 31 years old, and 2 months ago I bought my first home, a dream I'd saved for since I was 16. But that dream came with a twist I never expected. When I signed the papers, I thought I'd finally earned my freedom. Instead, I got a message from my mother. "You should really consider putting Sophie's name on the deed. It's only fair." Fair. After 13 years of doing everything on my own, I said no, and that's when they sued me. But let me back up. Before I tell you how my own family tried to take the one thing I built with my bare hands, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment, hit like, and follow if you've ever had to fight for your peace, even from people who share your blood. This isn't just about a house. It's about learning the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the people who raised you will never respect the life you built without them, and walking away, that might just be the bravest thing you ever do. I didn't grow up poor, but I didn't grow up seen either. We lived in a modest house just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Clean street, safe neighborhood, nice enough to impress strangers, but cold enough to make you forget you lived in it. My dad, Richard, worked in insurance. My mom, Monica, was a part-time realtor, though she spent most of her time managing other people's lives, including mine. But in our family there were rules, unspoken ones. Sophie, my younger sister, was the sensitive one, the one who got the soft landings. I was the independent one, which was just another way of saying no one worried if I sank. Sophie was always delicate, allergic to peanuts, bad with numbers, quick to tears. She couldn't make it through math class without Mom calling the teacher. I once failed a science test, and Dad said, "Good. Maybe next time you'll study harder." It wasn't abuse. It was just uneven. I knew my place in the family early on. I wasn't the favorite, but I was useful. I made good grades, kept my room clean, and never asked for anything. That's probably why they assumed I wouldn't complain when things started to shift. At 16, I got my first job at a diner. Minimum wage, long hours, grease in my hair, but I loved it. I loved earning my own money. I'd walk home after my shift and count every tip, tucking the bills into an envelope I kept hidden in the back of my closet. The envelope said "Freedom" in black Sharpie. I meant it. I didn't know what freedom would look like yet. College, maybe. An apartment. A different life than the one that seemed laid out for me. Meanwhile, Sophie went to cheerleading camp every summer. Mom made sure of it. When I asked about going 1 year just to try something new, Mom said, "You're not really the cheerleader type, Alina. You don't like attention." She wasn't wrong, but that didn't mean I didn't want to belong to something. In my junior year, Sophie totaled our parents' second car. She was texting. She didn't get grounded. In fact, Mom drove her to school for the next 6 months. When I accidentally scratched the side of the minivan while parking, I didn't drive again until I bought my own car. No one said it directly, but the message was clear. Sophie needed more. I didn't. I left home at 18 with a partial scholarship and 3 part-time jobs waiting in the city. I didn't come back for summers. Didn't come back for holidays either after the second year. The calls from my parents became shorter, stiffer, like they didn't know what to do with me anymore now that I wasn't doing anything for them. But even from a distance, I kept helping. I sent money when Sophie needed a new laptop for school. I Venmo'd Mom when the water heater broke. I didn't ask for it back. I just told myself this was what grown-ups did, that it was noble. Turns out nobility doesn't count for much when someone decides your hard-earned peace belongs to someone else. The day I closed on my house, I cried in the car. Not the pretty kind of crying, the deep kind. The kind that comes out of a body that's been holding its breath for over a decade. I didn't post about it. I didn't throw a party. I just walked into that empty little house, sat on the floor, and whispered I did it. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mom. "No congratulations. No, I'm proud of you. Just, you know it would mean a lot to your sister if you shared this with her." I stared at it for a long time, and I realized right then I was never building this life for them. I was building it in spite of them. Growing up, I thought favoritism was something that happened in other people's families. You know the stories where one kid gets the new car, the other gets silence. Where one gets rescued, the other gets expected to swim. But favoritism in our house didn't look loud. It looked polite. It looked like Sophie getting extra mashed potatoes while I was still finishing my plate. It looked like Mom holding her hand during family gatherings while I set the table alone. It looked like Dad beaming when Sophie brought home a C in chemistry. She tried so hard and not even blinking when I made the dean's list. When I was 23, I got promoted at work. It was a big deal, my first managerial role. I told my parents on a phone call, proud of myself for once. There was a pause on the other end. Then Mom said, "That's great, honey. By the way, Sophie's thinking of starting her own skincare line. Isn't that exciting?" She'd dropped out of college the year before, no job, no plan. But she had an idea, and somehow that was worth more celebration than anything I'd actually done. That's when I stopped sharing my good news. I realized it wasn't welcome, or maybe it just wasn't shiny enough. Sophie started calling me only when she needed something: money, rides, help with resumes. I never said no. I told myself it was what sisters did. One time she asked if I could co-sign a lease for her and her new boyfriend. "Just until we get on our feet," she said. They broke up 3 weeks later. She stopped paying rent. I paid the fees for almost a year. When I finally told Mom about it, hoping for some kind of support, she frowned and said, "Well, you agreed to help her, didn't you? That was your decision." Right. The same way it was apparently my decision to be invisible. There were birthdays I didn't get calls on, holidays I spent alone, and not because I wasn't invited, but because by the time I arrived it was like I wasn't there. At Sophie's college graduation, which she barely scraped through, Mom gave a toast. She called Sophie our miracle child. I was seated at the end of the table next to the waiter station. I smiled through the whole thing, posed for the pictures, ate my overpriced salmon. Then I drove home in silence and didn't speak to anyone for a month. I kept telling myself I didn't need recognition. That independence was my prize. But the truth, even the strongest people need to feel like they matter to someone. And when the people who are supposed to know you best don't even try, it leaves a mark. So I kept building my life. Quietly, deliberately. Every job, every saved dollar. Every time I bit my tongue instead of asking, "What about me?" I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I reached far enough, earned enough, proved enough, they'd see me too. But they didn't. And nothing brought that truth home more than the day I bought my house. You'd think they'd be happy, that they'd say, "We're proud of you, Alina. You did this on your own." Instead, I got told I owed it to someone else. Someone who hadn't worked for it. Someone who always had a cushion. Sophie. That was the first real crack. But the break. The break came later, and it was loud. There's something no one tells you about being the strong one. People don't thank you. They depend on you. And then they forget. For most of my 20s, I played that role without complaint. I paid off my student loans early, took jobs I didn't love just to keep a steady paycheck, cooked at home, skipped vacations, and drove a used car that rattled every time I hit a pothole. All so I could save, all so I could help. It started small. $100 here when Sophie's rent was late, a couple hundred there when Mom's car needed a new battery. But small things grow. And when you don't say no, people forget it was ever a choice to begin with. At 25, I was working full-time at a marketing agency and freelancing on the side to make extra money. I was burning out, but I didn't show it. I never did. When Dad's health insurance lapsed for 3 months after he switched jobs, I covered his prescriptions. He didn't ask. Mom did. Said it was just until things settle. I told myself it felt good to be needed. That's what I kept saying every time my bank balance dropped and nobody asked if I was okay. Sophie called me once crying. Her credit card had been maxed out. She'd used it to fund a pop-up boutique that failed in less than a month. I wired her money the next day. "No, thank you. Just, can you send it to Chase this time?" My other accounts frozen. The only time my phone rang was when something broke. Their car, their phone, their plans, and I kept showing up. I once drove 3 hours to pick up Sophie after she and her boyfriend had a fight at a music festival. She didn't speak the entire ride home, just scrolled through Instagram like I was her Uber driver. When I told Mom about it later, hoping stupidly for some kind of recognition, she laughed and said, "Well, you've always been the reliable one, Alina. That's a good thing." I nodded. But deep down I wondered, is it still a good thing if no one ever gives it back? I missed a dentist appointment once because I loaned Sophie the money I'd set aside for it. My wisdom teeth came in crooked, but I didn't have insurance that year. She posted photos from Vegas 2 weeks later, bottle service, matching swimsuits with her friends. Had girls' trip in gold letters behind them. I didn't say anything, didn't confront her, just scrolled past and told myself she was young and maybe she'd grow out of it. But quietly, a new thought started forming in the back of my mind. What if I wasn't helping? What if I was just making it easier for them not to grow? The thought scared me, because if that was true, then all those sacrifices weren't love, they were just misplaced effort. But even then, I didn't stop, because part of me still believed that maybe one day someone in that house would look at me and say, "You made this family better." No one ever did. After a while, I stopped picking up the phone right away. It wasn't on purpose at first. Sometimes I was busy. Other times I just didn't have the energy to listen to another problem that wasn't mine. I told myself I'd call back later. I usually did, but something inside me started to shift. I noticed how no one called unless they needed something. How are you was just a warm-up before the real ask. How even silence on the line felt like pressure, like they were waiting for me to offer before they had to ask. It's funny how long you can ignore a one-sided relationship when you desperately want it to feel mutual. I kept justifying it, told myself they were going through hard times, that families lean on each other, that love isn't measured in returned favors. But the truth, love is also attention. It's being seen. And I wasn't. I missed Sophie's birthday one year. I had a work trip in Chicago and couldn't make it back in time. I sent her a gift card, wrote her a nice message. She didn't reply. A week later, I saw a photo on Facebook. The whole family out at a winery, matching outfits, toasting glasses. Mom had written, "My people." My everything. I wasn't tagged, I wasn't even mentioned. When I brought it up to Dad just to see if they noticed I wasn't there, he said, "You've always been so independent, Alina. We figured you were busy." Busy, like being forgotten was my own fault. That word stuck in my throat for days. I started to see the pattern more clearly after that. At holidays, I was invited out of formality, not affection. I'd show up and be handed a task, set the table, bring the wine, take the family photo. Sophie would arrive late, empty-handed, and still be greeted like royalty. She always got the chair with the best lighting, the first slice of cake, the loudest laughs when she told stories that weren't even hers. I learned to smile in the background, to stay quiet unless spoken to pretend it didn't sting when Mom said, "Sophie lights up a room, doesn't she?" One Thanksgiving, I offered to host. I had just moved into a new rental and wanted to create something of my own. I cooked for 2 days. Cleaned every corner, bought their favorite wine, even the expensive one Dad liked. They came an hour late, complained about the traffic, criticized the turkey for being too dry. Sophie sat on her phone the whole time, scrolling, barely looking up. No one thanked me. When they left, I stood in the doorway holding a plate of half-eaten pie and realized I didn't feel like family. I felt like staff. And I know what some people would say, that I should have spoken up, that I should have demanded better. But here's the thing, you don't notice the cold when it's the only temperature you've ever known. You just keep layering up, convincing yourself it's not that bad. But deep down, I was tired. Not just physically, not just emotionally. Tired of always being the one trying. Because love shouldn't feel like a job. And family shouldn't feel like a performance you have to keep auditioning for. After that Thanksgiving, I started saying no. Not loudly, not angrily, just quietly. I skipped a birthday dinner here, said I couldn't make it to a barbecue there, let a few calls go to voicemail and didn't rush to return them. I didn't cut them off. I just stopped chasing connection that clearly didn't want to be caught. And you know what happened? Nothing. No one asked where I'd been. No one said, "Hey, we missed you." No one knocked on my door or called just to check in. I had been showing up for years, carrying the weight of relationships I thought were mutual. But the second I put it down, it was like I disappeared. At first it hurt. I thought maybe I was being tested, that they were waiting to see how far I'd drift before pulling me back. But they never did. They just filled the space I left with silence. Or worse, pretended it was never mine to begin with. Sophie unfollowed me on Instagram after I didn't comment on her new business launch. Mom stopped liking any of my posts unless they featured Biscuit my dog. Dad sent a group text once about a family dinner. I replied, said I was free that weekend. He never responded. It was like I was watching my own family from the outside, like they'd quietly voted me off the island and forgot to tell me. But here's the thing, the silence didn't make me angry. It made me honest. I started to see how much effort I'd been pouring into something that had no intention of growing, how I'd been planting seeds in dry soil year after year, hoping one day it would bloom. It never did. And when I finally stopped watering it, I realized something else. I didn't miss the noise. I missed the version of myself who thought she mattered. I tried one last time to reconnect. It was Mom's birthday. I sent flowers. Not expensive, but thoughtful. Her favorite color. A card with handwriting she'd recognize as mine. She texted back, "Thanks. Sophie got me orchids. So beautiful." That was it. Not cold, not cruel, just comparison. Always comparison. And that's when I knew. I could spend the rest of my life trying to earn a place in a family that saw me as convenient, not cherished. Or I could build something else, something real, even if it was small, even if it was lonely at first. Because what's lonelier, being alone or being surrounded by people who only love the version of you they can use? So I stopped showing up. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Because some goodbyes don't need a slammed door, just silence and the decision not to return. The funny thing about being excluded is, eventually you stop waiting for the invitation. Not out of bitterness, not out of pride, you just finally believe them. When someone keeps showing you you're not a priority, there comes a day when you stop pretending you are. That day came for me on a quiet Sunday morning. I was drinking coffee in my apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Biscuit, when I opened a letter from my leasing company. Rent increase. Again. Not by much, but enough to make me feel like I was building a life on shifting sand. Temporary. Borrowed. Conditional. I looked around my little space, the books I'd stacked as makeshift shelves, the curtains I'd hung with tension rods, the patched wall I'd painted myself, and I realized something. I'd made a home here. But it wasn't mine. And for the first time in years, I let myself say it out loud. I want something that's mine, not borrowed, not shared, not loaned to me because I'm the reliable one. Mine. That word stuck in my chest like a seed. I remembered that envelope I used to keep in my closet, the one labeled Freedom in black Sharpie. I still had it tucked in an old shoebox, now faded and crumpled from a decade of being opened and resealed. I pulled it out that afternoon. Inside was more than money. It was hours of overtime. It was birthday dinners skipped, new coats never bought, vacations postponed, emergency funds raided to solve someone else's problems. And yet there was enough. Enough to make a plan. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. That night I opened a spreadsheet and began mapping it all out. Income, expenses, savings, down payment estimates. I read everything I could about first-time homeownership, watched videos, called banks, relearned how credit scores worked. I created a folder on my desktop called The Plan. It was the most focused I'd felt in years, not because it would be easy, but because for once, no one else would touch it. No one could take credit. No one could undermine it. No one could step in at the last minute and say, "Actually, this belongs to Sophie." This dream didn't have space for extra names on the deed. It was mine. And as I laid out each piece of the process, from pre-approval to closing costs to inspection lists, I felt something shift. I wasn't just building a financial goal. I was building a boundary, a locked door, a quiet room, a set of keys that wouldn't be handed over for family. It wasn't about a house. It was about having something, anything, that no one else could take. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends, not coworkers, definitely not family. Because some things lose power the moment you invite outside voices. This dream needed silence to grow. It needed space to take root. And more than anything else, it needed me to believe I deserved it. So I did. For the first time in my life, I said it without guilt, without apology. I want a home of my own, and I will build it brick by brick without asking anyone for permission. I closed on the house on a Tuesday morning. It was raining. Not the dramatic movie kind of rain, just a steady gray drizzle that softened the edges of everything. I sat in the parking lot of the title office staring at the paperwork on the passenger seat still warm from the printer. My name was on it. Just mine. Elina Hart. Buyer. Owner. Occupant. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment. Relief. Pride. A little fear, maybe. What I didn't expect was grief. It hit me as I turned the key in the front door for the first time. This was the thing I had worked for, saved for, sacrificed for, and now it was mine. But there was no one to call, no one I wanted to share it with, no one who would celebrate without secretly resenting it, no one who could be proud without turning it into an obligation. So I celebrated with myself. I kicked off my shoes, walked barefoot through the empty rooms and whispered, "We did it, kid." I set down Biscuit's bed in the corner of the living room. He sniffed the air, gave a little tail wag, and curled up like he'd been waiting for this house too. That first night I slept on an air mattress with a single blanket surrounded by echoing walls and unopened boxes. And I was happy. Not loud jumping up and down happy, just still. Like my body finally understood it didn't have to flinch anymore. Like this space, this silence wasn't dangerous. It was mine. I spent the next few days unpacking slowly. Every mug, every book, every picture frame had to earn its place. I hung sheer curtains even though no one could see in, bought a secondhand table, painted the front door a shade of blue I didn't even know I loved, and for a brief golden stretch of days it felt like peace. Until the message came. It was a text from Mom. No emojis, no punctuation. Just, "Sophie needs help." That was it. I stared at it for a long time. My coffee grew cold. Then came the follow-up. It would mean so much to her if she had a chance to start fresh. Your house could be that for her. My house. The one I worked 13 years for. The one I bled and budgeted and battled for. The one no one asked about during the process. No congratulations, no questions, no offers to help move. Now suddenly it was part of a fresh start for someone who hadn't lifted a finger. I didn't respond, not right away. I let the silence sit, but it didn't stay quiet for long. Dad called 2 days later. His voice was low, measured, like he was speaking to a client, not his daughter. "We just think," he said, "that this could be a beautiful way for you to give back. You've always been the responsible one." Sophie's had a tough year. I asked him what exactly they were suggesting. He paused, then cleared his throat. "You could transfer the deed into both your names. Or maybe just hers. It would set her up for stability." I felt something inside me crack. Not break exactly, just fracture, like a glass under too much pressure. Still whole, but not for long. I told him I needed time to think. He said, "Of course, no rush. But Sophie's really counting on you." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw anything. I just stood in the middle of my new kitchen surrounded by boxes and hope and fresh paint and thought, this is it. This is the moment they show you who they really are. Not in crisis, not in chaos, but in peace. Because peace for people who are used to taking from you feels like rejection. And they will do anything to remind you that peace is not something you're allowed to keep for yourself. 3 days passed. I didn't respond to Mom's texts. I didn't return Dad's call. I needed space to think, to breathe, to remember that I had permission to protect the thing I built. But they didn't like silence. On the 4th day, they showed up. I was on the front porch watering the small patch of lavender I'd planted along the steps. Biscuit barked once, then retreated behind my legs when he saw the car. Mom stepped out first, hair curled, lipstick perfect, like this was some kind of social visit. Dad followed, phone in hand, as if he were too busy to be fully present. I didn't invite them in. We stood outside in the sun, the concrete warming under our feet like truth rising between us. "We were in the neighborhood," Mom said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thought we'd stop by and see the new place." I said nothing. She glanced at the door. "You're not going to show us around." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. Her face flickered. Dad cleared his throat. "Elina, look. We don't want this to turn into a thing. We just think what you're doing could be generous." Generous, I repeated. Don't twist it, Mom said, voice sharper now. You know Sophie's been through a lot. So have I. She blinked. I've been through a lot, I said again. Alone. Quietly. Without asking anyone to give up their house for me. Dad shifted uncomfortably. You're misunderstanding us. No, I said. I finally understand you. There was a pause. A long one. Mom crossed her arms. You're acting like we're asking you to hand over your life. You are. She's your sister. And I'm your daughter, I said. Or does that only count when I'm being useful? The silence this time wasn't awkward. It was honest. For the first time, I saw it in their faces. Not guilt, not regret, expectation. They weren't shocked I was upset. They were annoyed I was finally showing it. You've always been the strong one, Dad said, as if that was supposed to be a compliment. It wasn't a title I wanted, I replied. It's just the one you left me. Mom looked at me, her mouth tightening. You've changed. I had to. Maybe you should think about what kind of daughter turns her back on her own family. I looked down at the lavender, at the small green buds pushing through, and I said, maybe you should think about what kind of family makes that feel necessary. They left without saying goodbye. No hugs, no half-hearted apologies, just silence and the slam of a car door. I stood there for a long time after they drove off, the sun now hot on my back. Inside the house, everything felt different, smaller somehow, like the air had thickened with disappointment. Not mine, theirs. They weren't upset because I was cruel. They were upset because I'd stopped being convenient. That night, I sat on the floor with Biscuit curled beside me and stared at the ceiling, willing the tears not to come. But they did, not because I was second-guessing myself, because I finally understood the truth in full color. They didn't want to share my joy. They wanted to claim it. They didn't see my house as a home. They saw it as an asset to be redistributed. And the moment I refused to play along, I became the villain in their story. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. I was just tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of performing. Tired of making myself easier to love. And this time, I wasn't going back. The envelope came on a Thursday. Plain, white. No return address I recognized. I almost tossed it in the pile of coupons and pre-approvals, the usual junk that clutters a new homeowner's mailbox. But something about it felt heavier than paper. I opened it with one hand, Biscuit snuggled under my arm, chewing the corner of a throw pillow I'd told him not to destroy at least 100 times. The letter was from an attorney. I blinked, read it again, then again. At first the words didn't register. They looked like puzzle pieces from someone else's life. Legal phrases, statutes, filings, then my name, and Sophie's. And the words unlawful possession of shared family property. They were suing me. I sat down on the floor, my back against the hallway wall, the paper trembling in my hand. My family, my parents, my blood. They were suing me for the house I'd bought with my own savings after years of carrying their burdens without complaint. The letter claimed that the down payment had come from pooled family resources, that the house was intended to be co-owned, that my refusal to honor verbal agreements had caused emotional distress. I laughed, out loud. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I would scream. There had been no agreements, no co-signers, no joint accounts. Every penny had come from me, every call to the bank, every inspection, every late-night spreadsheet mine. And now they were turning my dream into a battlefield. I called a friend who worked in law. She walked me through the basics, her voice calm but tight. "You're not in the wrong," she said. "But this will still be ugly. They're hoping to shake you. Shake me. Like I was some loose change in their pocket. Something they could rattle until I broke open and gave them what they wanted." I didn't cry that night. Not yet. Instead, I stayed up until 3 a.m., digging through emails, printing bank statements, collecting every shred of proof that this house had nothing to do with anyone but me. I found the file I'd labeled the plan, the spreadsheet with dates, deposits, salary logs. The dream I had spent months building now turned into ammunition for a war I didn't start. Biscuit curled against me on the couch, sensing something I couldn't say out loud. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen staring at the sunlight on the floor tiles and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Abandoned. Not just by them, but by the idea that I ever truly belonged. This wasn't about a house. It was about control, about punishment. Because I said no. Because I chose myself. Because I stopped letting them write the story of who I was supposed to be. And when people lose control of the version of you they created, they often try to destroy the real one standing in front of them. That was the moment something hardened in me. Not bitterness, resolve. They could take me to court. They could file motions and send letters and twist the truth until it was unrecognizable. But they couldn't unwrite the years I'd survived. They couldn't erase the work, the silence, the sacrifice. They could challenge my name on the deed, but they'd never touch the foundation I'd built inside myself. This wasn't just a legal fight now, it was a reckoning. And I was done playing small just to make them comfortable. I thought gathering the paperwork would be the hardest part. Turns out the hardest part was remembering. Every document I opened took me back, the first paycheck I ever deposited. It was for $82.20, and I remember how I'd smiled when I saw it clear. The tuition receipt from community college paid in full, with tips and student aid. The apartment lease I signed at 19 where the carpet smelled like old soup, and I still felt lucky. I printed utility bills in my name from over a decade ago, pulled old tax returns, scrolled through bank statements that told a story no one else had ever cared to hear. Each page whispered, "You built this." Each one reminded me what it had taken to get here, and still that little voice crept in at 2 a.m. when the room was too quiet and my heart too loud. What if they win? Not legally. Logically, I knew I had the facts. The law was on my side. But emotionally, what if they convinced the world that I was the villain, the ungrateful daughter, the selfish sister, the girl who chose bricks and floorboards over blood? That fear was harder to shake than any lawsuit. Because the truth is, I didn't want to fight. I wanted to be believed. I wanted them to remember who I was, what I'd done, how I'd shown up again and again even when no one asked if I was tired. But they didn't. So I started documenting it myself. I created a folder called Proof. Not just for court, for me. Screenshots of every payment I'd sent, messages I'd saved where they'd asked for help, spreadsheets with timelines, photos of moving boxes I'd carried alone. It was meticulous, exhausting, and oddly healing. For once, I wasn't second-guessing what I'd given. I was seeing it in black and white, and it wasn't small. It was a life. It was my life. One night, while digging through an old hard drive, I found a video I'd forgotten I recorded. It was from the night I first got approved for a mortgage. The camera was shaky, just me in a hoodie holding up a printed email with tears in my eyes. "I did it," I whispered to the screen. No one helped. And that's okay. It's mine. I watched it 3 times, not because I needed proof for anyone else, but because I needed to remember I hadn't imagined it. The work, the hunger, the years of swallowing pride so I could stay standing. That girl in the video had no idea what was coming, but she was right about one thing. It was hers, and that was all I needed. The next morning I met with a lawyer. He asked me to walk him through everything. I did. Calmly, clearly, almost too calmly. At the end he looked at me and said, "You know you've already won this emotionally. The law just needs to catch up." I smiled, but I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Because what they were trying to take wasn't just my house, it was the narrative. They wanted to rewrite the story so I was the one who betrayed them, so they could live comfortably in their version of events where love was conditional and boundaries were insults. But I wasn't going to let them. Not this time. I was done folding myself into shapes that made them feel more secure. Done pretending that family only matters if you're willing to disappear for it. If this was war, I wouldn't fight dirty. I'd fight with facts. But I would fight. And when it was over, I wouldn't just have a house. I'd have the one thing I had never been allowed to keep, myself. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic oak panels, no soaring ceilings, just beige walls, stiff chairs, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead. But even in its ordinariness, it felt sacred, because this was the room where truth would finally be spoken out loud, not whispered, not implied, not buried under guilt. Spoken. I sat at the petitioner's table next to my attorney, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Biscuit wasn't allowed, of course, but I imagined him curled beside me the way he always did when I needed steadiness more than affection. Across from me sat my parents, Richard and Monica Hart, the people who raised me, who fed me, who taught me how to ride a bike and balance a checkbook, and always keep my voice soft when others were loud. And now they were here to convince a judge that I owed them something I'd built alone. The judge was a woman in her 60s, calm, no nonsense. She looked at us like she'd seen this all before. Maybe she had. Maybe family betrayal is less rare than we like to believe. The proceedings began with opening statements, legal terms floating in the air like sharp edges. Then came their turn. First, my father. He stood, cleared his throat, and painted a picture of a daughter who'd always been supported by the family. He called my success a team effort, said they'd sacrificed vacations, saved pennies to give me opportunities. He didn't mention that I'd paid for most of college with scholarships and midnight shifts, or that I'd been working since 16, or that I'd sent money back home more times than I could count. Then Mom took the stand. Her voice was steady, almost tender. She said I'd distanced myself in recent years, that Sophie looked up to me so much and only wanted a chance to build something of her own, that this house, Alina's house, could have brought the family together. I watched her carefully. She wasn't angry, she was composed, convincing, deliberate. That was the part that hurt the most. Not that they lied, but that they rehearsed it, like this wasn't personal, just strategy. Then it was my turn. I didn't try to match their tone. I didn't speak louder or lean harder into sympathy. I just told the truth. I explained how I'd been financially independent since I was a teenager, how I'd saved for years, worked double shifts, built my credit, researched the process, and closed on the house without a single co-signer. I showed the spreadsheets, the transfers, the messages where they'd asked for money, not offered it. I told the court about the text that started it all, the suggestion that I put Sophie on the deed, how that escalated into pressure, then demands, then this. I didn't cry, but my voice did crack once when I said I never asked them to celebrate me, but I didn't think they'd punish me either. There was a pause after I finished. A long one. Then the judge spoke. "I see no legal basis for this claim," she said, her voice cool and clear. "Property ownership is documented and unambiguous. This case is dismissed. Just like that. It was over. Legally, anyway." I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just nodded and stood. As I walked out of that room, I passed my parents. They didn't look at me. Sophie was in the back, her arms folded, expression unreadable. She didn't speak either. And that was when it hit me. Not a victory, a funeral, not for a person, but for a version of family I'd clung to far too long. One that said, if I give enough, they'll love me. If I sacrifice enough, they'll see me. They didn't. And now, finally, I didn't need them to. I thought the silence after the verdict would be peaceful. I thought I'd walk out of that courtroom, close the door, and finally breathe. But people don't always accept endings, especially the ones who lost. 3 days after the case was dismissed, the posts started. First from Sophie, a photo of her as a kid in our old backyard. Captioned, "Some people forget where they came from. I never will." Then another, "Imagine choosing money over blood." She never mentioned my name. She didn't have to. The comments filled in the blanks. People we both knew. Family friends, distant cousins, some genuinely confused, others gleeful to pick a side. She was always cold. Her parents gave her everything. Poor Sophie, she deserves better. I stayed quiet. I didn't respond. I didn't correct the lies. Because if I'd learned anything from that courtroom, it was this: people believe the version of you that makes them feel comfortable, not the version that's true. Then came the GoFundMe, created by my Aunt Pamela, Mom's sister. Help Sophie start again after betrayal. Every dollar brings her closer to healing. There was a photo of the house, my house. From the outside, at an angle probably taken when I wasn't home. The caption called it family property wrongfully hoarded. They raised over $8,000 in 5 days. I reported the page. I flagged the images. I called a friend in tech law who helped me draft a takedown notice. Eventually, the platform removed it. But the damage was done. The internet never forgets. Screenshots live longer than truth. What hurt most wasn't the lies. It was how easily they spread. I wasn't famous, I wasn't influential, I was just accessible, easy to paint as cold, easy to twist into the villain, easy to point at and say, look what happens when someone gets too full of herself. And still I didn't fight back, not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining, tired of justifying, tired of bleeding in public just to prove I wasn't the one holding the knife. So I logged off. Not forever, just long enough to remember the sound of my own thoughts. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to defend yourself against people who already decided you're guilty. I didn't expect anyone to speak up for me. I wasn't looking for a rescue. But sometimes the silence around you begins to crack in unexpected places. It started with a message from my cousin Nora. We hadn't talked in years. Grew up together, then drifted the way families often do when real life takes over. Her message was short. I saw the posts. I just want you to know I remember who always paid for dinner, who stayed late to help clean up. It wasn't Sophie. Then another, from a friend of the family. They're rewriting history, but some of us still know the original version. I didn't reply to most of them, not because I wasn't grateful. I just didn't know how. For so long, I'd assumed my silence made me invisible, that if I didn't tell my side, no one would know it existed. But somehow people did. And then came the message that stopped me cold, from my grandfather Raymond. We'd never been close. He was quiet, almost gruff, the kind of man who believed feelings were things you buried, not shared. But there he was in my inbox. Alina, I saw the news. I watched it happen. You were alone in that courtroom, but you didn't flinch. You were always the one holding up that house, even when they pretended not to see it. He ended with one line I'll never forget. You didn't succeed because of them. You succeeded in spite of them. And I'm proud of you. I read it twice. Then a third time. And for the first time since the lawsuit, I cried. Not from pain, but from relief. Because when the truth finally finds a voice, any voice, it doesn't matter how long it was silent. It matters that it spoke. The takedown notice went through. The GoFundMe page disappeared overnight. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. For a while, no one said anything. Not Sophie, not Aunt Pamela, not Mom or Dad. But the silence online began to shift. People started asking questions. Where did the money go? Why was the story deleted? What happened to all that righteous outrage? At first, the questions were gentle. Then they sharpened. Someone shared a screenshot from Sophie's private Instagram, a photo of a designer bag. The caption read, "Self-care after a long season of stress." It didn't take much for the comments to turn. Wait, didn't this come from the fundraiser? Where's the accountability? Maybe Elena wasn't the problem. I didn't post, didn't engage. I just watched. Not with satisfaction, but with a strange, bittersweet ache. Because this wasn't vindication. It was collapse. What they'd built, this false narrative of betrayal and victimhood, was crumbling under the weight of its own fiction. The real Sophie began to show. She lashed out in stories, blocked people, deleted comments. Then she went quiet. A few weeks later, I heard from someone who worked at the nonprofit where Aunt Pamela volunteered. She'd been asked to step down. No public scandal, just a quiet exit under the banner of misalignment with community values. The ripple effects were small but steady. I started getting tagged in fewer posts. My name stopped appearing in side conversations. And for the first time since the lawsuit, I could open my phone without bracing myself for a punch. But the real shift wasn't out there. It was in here, in me. I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped hoping someone would show up at my door with flowers and tears ready to say, "We were wrong," because I finally understood something that took me 31 years to learn. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's not a headline or a confession or a full circle moment. Sometimes justice is just the peace of no longer needing to explain yourself. It's watching the storm pass and realizing you're still standing. It's knowing you didn't match their chaos with chaos of your own. You just stayed solid. And when the dust settles, people see the difference. Not always right away, not all at once, but eventually the truth makes its way through. Not because you shouted, but because you didn't move. You didn't shrink. You didn't play the game. You just told your truth and held the line. That's what I did. And one morning, weeks after the noise had faded, I stepped outside, barefoot, coffee in hand, and watched the light hit my front porch. It was quiet, warm, still. For the first time in months, I felt safe, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone for it. It started with a knock on the door. Soft, not urgent, the kind of knock that didn't demand anything. When I opened it, there he was. My grandfather, Raymond Hart, holding a small brown paper bag and a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I brought pie," he said. I stepped aside. Didn't ask questions. Didn't say much. Just let him in. We sat in the kitchen. I made coffee. He placed the pie on the counter like it was some kind of offering. It wasn't store-bought. I could tell from the way the crust folded imperfect and human. He didn't start with apologies. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He just pointed at a photograph on the fridge. It was me and Biscuit taken on move-in day. I was sweaty, smiling, holding the keys like they were made of gold. "You look like your grandmother in that one," he said. She had that same stubborn grin when she got her first job. I didn't know how to respond, so I nodded and said, "Thanks for the message. It meant more than you think." He cleared his throat, looked down at the mug in his hands. "I wasn't always good at saying the right thing," he said, "especially when your parents were raising you." I saw things. I stayed quiet. He looked up. That was a mistake. I swallowed hard. Something about hearing it out loud, acknowledgement without defense, felt bigger than I could hold. We sat in the quiet for a while. Then he said, "They didn't break you. They tried, but you didn't let them." "I almost did," I whispered. "But you didn't," he said, like it was final. We ate pie in silence, the kind of silence that feels like a hand on your shoulder, not a weight on your chest. After he left, I sat on the porch with Biscuit curled at my feet, watching the sun ease its way down. I thought about all the things I wanted from my family growing up: recognition, protection, love without conditions. I didn't get those things, but in that kitchen over coffee and pie and a few quiet sentences, I got something else. I got seen, not by everyone, but by someone who mattered. And maybe I thought that's enough. Maybe family isn't about who shows up at your graduation or who makes the biggest toast at your wedding. Maybe family is the one who shows up with pie when no one else does, the one who tells the truth even if it's 30 years too late. That night I walked through my home with the lights low and the windows open. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel like I was defending it. I was living in it, fully, quietly, freely. And I knew without doubt that I didn't just win a case. I reclaimed my name. There's a moment after a long storm where the quiet feels unfamiliar, like you've forgotten what stillness sounds like your body doesn't know how to exist without bracing for impact. That's where I found myself weeks after everything settled. The lawsuit was over. The fundraiser had vanished. The internet moved on. And I was still here, still standing in my house, still waking up in the same bed, still walking the same dog. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living in defense. I wasn't explaining my choices. I wasn't anticipating the next guilt trip, the next favor, the next twist of the knife wrapped in, "We're just concerned." I was just living. I started spending more time outside, mornings on the porch with coffee, evenings walking Biscuit through the neighborhood, letting him sniff every corner like we had all the time in the world. The neighbors started to wave. I started waving back. I planted herbs along the back fence: basil, mint, lavender. Watched them stretch toward the sun without asking permission to take up space. It felt symbolic. I was learning how to grow things again, not because I had to, not to prove anything, just because I could. One afternoon, I went to the local farmer's market and bought a framed print from a teenage artist. It said in loopy handwriting, "You are allowed to be proud of a life no one clapped for." I hung it in my hallway. I passed it every morning, every night. And with time, those words started to feel less like a reminder and more like a truth that belonged to me. I didn't talk to my parents, not out of anger. I just didn't have anything left to give them. There was a quiet freedom in letting go of the idea that reconciliation was a requirement for peace. Not every story needs a reunion, some just need closure. I did hear from my grandfather now and then, not often, but enough. A text here, a photo of his garden. One morning, he left a small basket on my porch. Inside were tomatoes, a handwritten recipe, and a note that simply read, "Use your own salt. You know what it needs." I smiled at that for a long time, because for the first time someone in my family didn't try to tell me what to do. He just trusted that I'd figure it out. And I did. Slowly, the house began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. I replaced the light fixture in the kitchen with one I'd picked out myself. Bought a new rug not because I needed it, but because I liked how it felt under my feet. Painted the second bedroom soft green just because it made the room feel calmer. Each small choice was a declaration: I belong here. I deserve this. I don't have to ask. There were still moments when the past crept in, a song that reminded me of a road trip we never took. A birthday I didn't get a card for. A voicemail from a cousin I knew had only heard one version of the story. But the difference now was I didn't shrink when it happened. I didn't crumble. I just noticed the ache, acknowledged it, and kept moving. Because peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of self. And mine was finally coming home. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want anyone to fall apart or beg for forgiveness or get what they deserved. I just wanted my life back. And that slowly is exactly what I got. In the months after everything unraveled, I started hearing bits and pieces, snippets from neighbors, friends of friends, people who knew someone who knew someone. Pamela had been asked not to return to the nonprofit where she volunteered. No press, no scandal, just a quiet reminder that character matters, even when you think no one's watching. Sophie tried launching another fundraiser. This time it was for a wellness retreat. It never gained traction. People asked too many questions. Screenshots from the last campaign resurfaced. The internet doesn't forget. Eventually, the page disappeared too. She started working part-time at a boutique downtown. I passed by once by accident and saw her through the window folding sweaters, frowning into her phone. I didn't go in. Not because I was avoiding her, because I didn't feel the need to be seen anymore. For so long, my hurt had stemmed from wanting recognition, from craving some kind of cosmic acknowledgement that I was right, that I had been wronged, that anyone should finally say it. But now, I didn't need it. The absence of chaos was enough. One night I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was my mother. Her voice was calm, polished as always. "Elena." "I hope you're well," she said. "Your father and I were just talking about you. Sophie's birthday is coming up, and it would mean a lot if we could all get together, maybe start fresh." Think about it. She didn't mention the lawsuit, or the GoFundMe, or the lies. Just start fresh. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because I was finally at peace. And peace isn't something you owe anyone, especially not the people who tried to tear it from your hands. I sat with that voicemail for a long time, listened to it once, then deleted it. It didn't hurt. It just didn't matter. That was the shift I didn't see coming. When pain fades, it doesn't always leave joy in its place. Sometimes it just leaves space, and in that space you get to choose what grows. I chose silence. I chose privacy. I chose a Saturday morning where I could make pancakes without flinching at a notification. I chose mornings with biscuit chasing birds in the yard, afternoons reading books I hadn't touched in years, evenings cooking for one and not calling it lonely. One day while pulling weeds in the garden, I found a small metal tag buried in the dirt. It was old rusted, a plant marker, the kind you'd press into the ground to remember what you planted. There was one word scratched into it: Root. I cleaned it off and stuck it back into the soil beside the rosemary. And I thought, yes, that's it. That's what I've been doing. Not rebuilding, not recovering, rooting. Because healing doesn't always look like transformation. Sometimes it looks like finally staying in one place long enough to bloom. There's a freedom that comes not from being seen, but from no longer needing to be. For most of my life, I carried the weight of explaining myself. I explained why I couldn't come home for the holidays, why I said no to another loan, why I didn't speak up more, smile more, forgive more, give more. I shaped my voice like a soft answer, thinking maybe if I were gentler, more reasonable, more digestible, they would finally understand me. They never did. And now, I don't need them to. That realization didn't arrive like lightning. It came slowly in pieces like a sweater you unravel one stitch at a time until suddenly your hands are empty and warm and free. It came one evening when I was writing in my journal. Just a few lines. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving well. I paused, read it again, then I underlined it. Twice. Because for so long I had apologized for the life I'd built, apologized for the boundaries, for the absence, for the house with only one name on the deed. I thought if I explained it just right, they'd say, "We understand," but now I see the truth. Understanding was never the point. Control was. They didn't want to know how I did it. They wanted to remind me that I shouldn't have done it without them. And the more I thrived quietly, the louder their disapproval became. But here's what I've learned. You can't make people comfortable with a version of you they resent for being free. So stop trying. Let them misunderstand you. Let them believe you're cold, distant, selfish, proud. Let them sit with the version of you that no longer needs to shrink to fit inside their story. Because you're healing, your happiness, your peace was never supposed to make them feel good. It was supposed to make you feel whole, and I do. I feel whole in ways I never thought possible. Not because everything is perfect. There are still days when the ache comes back like a ghost, when I see families laughing in a park and feel something hollow open up in my chest. There are still songs I skip, voicemails I save but never replay. But the difference now is I no longer make those things mean I'm broken. They just mean I'm human. I'm a woman who built something good and true and entirely her own, in the quiet, without applause, without approval. And that is enough. Sometimes late at night I stand at the kitchen window and look out at the street. The porch light is soft. The air is still. I think about the girl I used to be. The one who tiptoed through conversations afraid to say too much. The one who gave too quickly, forgave too easily, and held out her hand hoping someone might finally take it without asking for more. She didn't disappear. She just grew up. And I love her for surviving, for being brave in ways no one saw, for holding the line even when her voice trembled. And I promise her every day I wake up in this house, in this life, we are done performing. We are done begging. We are home. The days began to blur in the best way, not because nothing was happening, but because everything happening finally felt gentle. I started waking up without dread, no notifications to fear, no conversations to rehearse in my head, just sunlight through the window, the soft thud of Biscuit's tail against the hardwood floor, and the smell of coffee drifting through my kitchen. For the first time in years, I had room, not just physical space, but mental space, the kind where thoughts didn't have to fight for air, the kind where silence wasn't a threat. One afternoon, while reorganizing the small bookshelf in my living room, I found an old journal wedged behind a stack of cookbooks. It was from college, spiral-bound, the cover peeling at the corners. Inside were pages filled with short stories, half-finished ideas, scraps of dialogue I'd scribbled between shifts and study sessions. I smiled. I had forgotten how much I used to love writing, not for grades, not for praise, just for me. I spent the rest of that evening on the couch, pen in hand, words spilling slowly. It didn't matter if it was good. It didn't need to be shared. It just needed to exist. And I realized healing isn't just about what you walk away from. It's also about what you come back to, the parts of you that got buried under survival, the dreams that sat quietly waiting for the noise to die down. This wasn't about starting over. It was about starting from here, from peace, from truth, from a place where I no longer needed to earn my worth. And in that stillness, something opened. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough to let the light in. There's a moment when you realize you've made it. Not because the world clapped, not because anyone called to say you were right, but because you no longer flinch when the past knocks. You just let it pass. That's where I found myself one quiet morning sitting at my kitchen table with a notebook and a cup of tea. No noise, no defense, just stillness. And in that stillness, a sentence came to me. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving well. I wrote it down. Then I stared at it, because for years I thought I did. I thought I owed it to them to explain why I needed space, why I said no, why I walked away. I thought if I could just word it right, they'd understand. They'd accept it. They'd maybe even respect it. But the truth is, some people don't want understanding. They want control. And when you no longer give it to them, they'll call your boundaries betrayal, your peace selfishness, your healing an attack. Let them talk, let them twist it. Let them sit in rooms where you're no longer present and build versions of you that never existed. You don't owe them clarity. You owe yourself freedom. And sometimes that means walking away without leaving a trail behind. No justifications, no final speeches, just the quiet knowing that you made it. You got out. And more than that, you stayed out. It happened on a Sunday. The sun was low. Biscuit was chasing a moth across the lawn. I was watering the basil when a little voice called from the sidewalk. "Is this your house?" I looked up. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, stood with a pink bike helmet and a popsicle dripping down her hand. I smiled. "It is." She nodded, thoughtful. "I want a house like that one day, one with a porch, and plants, and a dog." She paused. "Do you think I could do that? I didn't even blink." "Yes," I said. "You absolutely can." She grinned and rode off the streamers on her handlebars, fluttering like tiny flags. I stood there for a long time after she disappeared, the hose still running, because in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This story, my story, isn't just about leaving behind pain. It's about showing someone else that they can build something beautiful even from the ruins. That a peaceful life doesn't require permission. That surviving doesn't need to be explained. That the freedom you fight for will echo beyond you. So if you're watching this and you're holding your breath around people who call it love, if you're quietly carrying the weight of being the strong one, if you've ever been made to feel guilty for choosing peace, let this be your reminder. You don't have to stay where you're unseen. You don't have to shrink to be accepted. You are allowed to want more, to walk away, to begin again. And if you needed a sign that it's okay to choose yourself, this is it. If this story spoke to something in you, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe that sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's legacy, and it starts with one step.